To read about the characteristics of mysticism in Evelyn Underhill. And we're just sharing what we're learning as a convenience. We haven't read this material, we just share what we read. All mystics, says Saint Martin, speak the same language, for they come from the same country. Now, returning to our original undertaking, that of defining, if we can, the characteristics of...
How do you understand when it says come from the same country?
Well, what, like our Spanish friends?
It says,
It's universal. It's universal where we're talking about the same thing in different languages and from different countries. That's why we could be brothers with our Spanish
Is it possible to
devotees.
Say the country of love, maybe? They come from all those, that different way of life.
They're experiencing the same path and they're just in Spanish. Now, on returning to our original undertaking, that of defining, if we can, the characteristics of true mysticism. Seems she's got only true mysticism. I think that we have already reached a point at which William James's four celebrated four marks of the mystic state, ineffability, gnostic quality, transiency, and passivity, will fail to satisfy us. In their place, I propose to set out illustrated and, I hope, justify four other rules or notes which may be applied as tests to any given case which claims to take rank amongst the mystics. She has four other rules she's proposing. Number 1, true mysticism is active and practical. See, it's active. It's not passive. Do you think a true mystic is active and practical? Mm-hmm. Not passive and theoretical. Oh, God.
It's action in inaction, isn't it?
He's not passive and theoretical. Do you think it's like theoretical theology?
Is action in inaction.
Yeah. True mysticism is active and practical, not passive and theoretical. It is an organic life process. It's like a way. Remember how John Main said it's a way, not a technique. It's not a technique. It is an organic life process. It's like following the Tao. A something which the whole self does, not something as to which its intellect holds an opinion. Do you think it's just an intellectual opinion? No, it's not. Number 2, its aims are wholly transcendental and spiritual. It is in no way concerned with adding to, exploring, rearranging, or improving anything in the visible universe. You think it could just be done to improve your looks or maybe your health? Just improve my health. The mystic brushes aside that universe even in its supernormal manifestations, though he does not, as his enemies declare, neglect his duty to the many. His heart is always set upon the changeless one. So they're really devoted to God. They're not like just on a health spa. Number 3, this one is for the mystic, not merely the reality of all that is, but also a living, personal object of love. Never an object of exploration. It draws his whole being homeward, but always under the guidance of the heart. He's under the guidance of the heart. 4, living union with this one, which is the term of his adventure, is a definite state or form of enhanced life. So it's a definite state or form of enhanced life. It is obtained neither from an intellectual realization of its delights, nor from the most acute emotional longings. Though these must be present, they are not enough. It is arrived at by an arduous psychological and spiritual process. Arduous psychological and spiritual process. The so-called mystic way. It's like following a way, the path, entailing the complete remaking of character and the liberation of a new, or rather latent form of consciousness, which imposes on the self the condition which is sometimes inaccurately called ecstasy, but is better named the unitive state. Mysticism, then, is not an opinion. It is not a philosophy. It has nothing in common with the pursuit of occult knowledge. On the one hand, it is not merely the power of contemplating eternity. On the other, it is not to be identified with any kind of religious queerness. It is the name of that organic process which involves the perfect consummation of the love of God. The achievement here and now of the immortal heritage of man, or if you like it better, for this means exactly the same thing. It is the art of establishing his conscious relation with the Absolute. The movement of the mystic consciousness towards this consummation is not merely the sudden admission to an overwhelming vision of truth, though such dazzling glimpses may from time to time be vouchsafed to the soul. It is rather an ordered movement towards ever higher levels of reality, ever closer identification with the infinite. Quote, "The mystic experience," says Resajak. Who is he? Recejak. Quote, ends with the words, quote, "I live, yet not I, but God in me." This feeling of identification, which is the term of mystical activity, has a very important significance. In its early stages, the mystic consciousness feels the absolute in opposition to the self. As mystic activity goes on, it tends to abolish this opposition. When it has reached its term, the consciousness finds itself possessed by the sense of a being at one and the same time, greater than the self, and identical with it, great enough to be God, intimate enough to be me. This is that mystic union which is the only possible fulfillment of mystic love, since, quote, all that is not one must ever suffer with the wound of absence, and whoever in love's city enters finds but the room for one. And but in oneness union. You have to read the footnote here if you... I would suggest you get the book. The History of Mysticism is the history... What? The History of Mysticism. That's enough. We can end there. We could stop here.
No, this
What?
still the best book. I read it from this
Why don't I stop?
one.
The History of Mysticism. What?
Not the notes.
I didn't read the notes. The History of Mysticism is the history of the demonstration of this law upon the plane of reality. Now, how do these statements square with the practice of the great mystics and with the various forms of activity which have been classified at one time or another as mystical? That's the next lesson. We are not having a lesson. We're just reading this book and sharing what we're reading. We have never read this material. This is called convenience of sharing. We were reading up to page 42 from chapter on the characteristics of mysticism in Evelyn Underhill's Mysticism, 12th revised edition, a study in nature and development of spiritual consciousness. Where did I get this? Pantanos Classics. This book was not that easy to get.